to continue. Okay. So great to be with you all. And again, I look forward to other gatherings where we're sharing our wisdom. As many of you know, I've been putting the word out about Essence Tribe. Some of you are members, some of you are not yet members, but that online community is a place where everyone shares their wisdom. There's a deep question posed, and then there's a really deep exploration and unearthing of the question itself. And this talk we actually put out to a wide array of audiences. We put it out because we wanted to give people the chance to know that taking a look at Essence Tribe is a place where you might find a home, and that home includes being able to explore your truth. Yeah, being able to really go deep within and discover what's true for you now, what's no longer true for you, what's something you're really wrestling with. So it's a community that is really safe for the personal exploration. So tonight's talk, the power of perspective. I'm going to start by reading a couple different quotes for you from individuals of different eras, all of which are speaking from a perspective that they have. So first is a beautiful Islamic mystic that lived in the late she lived 700s and she died in 801, Rabia. And she said, and she's an Islamic saint, so she has that languaging around her truth and her perspective. When God said, "My hands are yours," I saw that I could heal any creature in this world. I saw that the divine beauty in each heart is the root of all time and space. The power of perspective she gives witness to, doesn't she? And it's a perspective that she owns. And then we have Nikola Tesla. My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists. Perspective. Perspective. Then we have Mother Teresa, who said that she had the direct experience of Christ in every human being. Perspective. Perspective. And then a favorite of mine, Kabir, lovely mystic, who was kind of disowned by the Islamic and Hindu traditions because of his focus upon the delusion of religious identity. But then once he died, as mystics always have happened, both claimed him as a saint they loved. He says, I am standing naked in the marketplace, but no one turns their head to look at me, for no one can see me as I am. Still, I offer my friendship to all. Still, to each wing and fin and cell, I will be forever in obeisance. Anyone who bows touches my feet. Anyone who sings helps me in my work. All labor is because my sinew quivers. I cover the divine flame in my heart, for if I turned God loose from my house, the earth would reveal to your eyes what mine always see. Existence is a lamp, and Kabir, the oil it burns. Existence is a lamp, and Kabir is the oil it burns. Wow, another perspective. Look at those 4 different perspectives Now they have an undercurrent of similar ways that they're looking at the world and looking at their lives, but they come to it in completely diverse ways. And they come to it in a way that leads them to a place of great freedom and joy and compassion and peace and understanding. It was their perspectives that set them free. Now, their perspectives came from experience, and experience is the raw place where we are stirred into an awakening that influences our perspective. But ultimately, we orient ourselves consciously and unconsciously according to our perspectives. And that's why this talk is called The Power of Perspective. Because it's important for us, I believe, to take seriously this phrase that perspective has power in our lives, that a perspective can limit us, and a perspective can liberate us, and a perspective can set us into suffering for years, and a perspective can set us free in an instant that lasts for the rest of our lives, and everywhere in between. That's how important perspectives are. And yet so often our perspectives become something like habits. They settle in within us and they end up influencing our lives. And what was conscious at one point becomes even unconscious. And then we wonder why we feel contracted or limited or struggle or have suffering. So this talk is not oriented towards giving all of the solutions that are out there when it comes to stepping into liberating perspectives. What my hope is that this talk allows us to break the topic open in such a way that you have a couple key reflections and insights that you can take with you. So that's where we're going to go tonight. And it operates on an operating assumption. In this talk, I'm talking about the kinds of perspectives that are oriented towards us becoming the full person we're meant to be in life. So there are many perspectives that influence. We can have a perspective on how the airline agencies work. We can have a political perspective. We can have a perspective that's close to the city, that's oriented towards the city we live in and how we work in the city. We can have a perspective on how we do our daily routine and what eye drops we use or don't use. So there are many layers in which perspective affects our lives, and they all matter to our awakening. But here I want to talk specifically to those perspectives that are the pieces, the places from which we are oriented when it comes to awakening. All right. So I'm going to actually turn on another light because I don't like how dim this is. And while I do that, I'd like you to just reflect for a moment. If you have a piece of pen and a paper, write it down. Reflect for a moment. What is a time that your perspective shifted in such a way that the fruit was a new unleashing in your own life? Even if you don't hold that perspective as true anymore, it served a purpose in a moment. So just go ahead and think about that. What is a perspective that shifted at some point in your life and influenced you along the paths of freedom and joy and love? I'm going to work on my lighting. A little washed out, but a little clearer. All right, so hopefully in that very brief 30 seconds, you were able to recall, pull into your mind some perspective. And I bet if you spent a day with that perspective that shifted, you could really pull forward many things to understand about yourself. your response in this world, your personal orientation, the operative principles that are inspiration. So for me, inspiration, I use the word the beloved, and that's a catchphrase for the ineffable source, life force, universal energy, forms of God, all the tapestry of what we might call divine. And that's very operative for me when it comes to perspective. But I bet that if you took that one incident or experience, you could really discover a lot about yourself from a place of deep unconditional acceptance and compassion. Yes. So I gave you those 4 examples of pretty insightful statements spoken by individuals that had experienced something that influenced their view of themselves, the world, and beyond, because that's what we're talking about. Ourselves, the world we call our world we live in, and everything else that could be subtle energy, other realms, parallel universes, other planes of consciousness, other planetary constellations, and the uncreated field, just to name a bit of the other. But our perspectives influence all 3 of those things. Now, I want to take, as we're entering into this talk, to lay the groundwork, I want to take the 2 really important words, power and perspective, because the title of the talk is The Power of Perspective. And power is a tricky word, isn't it? I mean, it's gotten loaded down with a lot of suspicion because we've experienced a lot of misuse of power. And in our experience of the misuse of power, we tend to hold power as suspects. Oh, I better watch, right? Right? Is that power going to be unleashed? Is it going to cause harm? Is it going to be an agency of good? Is it dependable? Because power is an agency and it's worthy of bowing and a little bit of respect to. But it has also created a bit of taboo about words such as stepping into my power. Now, many of us are in circles that have supportive environments for that phraseology. I'm going to own my personal power. I'm going to step into my power. But the underlying assumption with that is that we're coming from the true sense of self and not the false sense of self, right? We're coming from the place where we are aligned with the highest good. Because when power is not aligned with the highest good, when the vessel that's wielding the power has so many wounds that's coming into the agency, we've seen terrible things happen. So operative in I'm going to claim my power is this assumption that in doing that, we're opening ourselves to the very process of what it means to be truly empowered from the true sense of self. Now, if you look back at the etymology of power, spanning back, well, my gosh, many years, but it's most notable from the 13th century on, you will find what is not a surprising definition of power, even back there, coming from French, Latin, Spanish. We get poder, puer, and potere. And power is simply this: the ability to act or do. It's an ability or a capacity, and it's an agency that influences things. Now, what if you have a power? Let's say you have an emotion of anger you've never expressed, and it riles up with a lot of power, but you keep it all in. Well, even there, even though you say you're not acting on it, you actually are, because that uprising of self, your orientation around how you work with that is your power, is your capacity and your ability. And you are affecting yourself and undoubtedly others through how you work with it. So we are not islands, and our use or misuse of power affects ourselves and others no matter what we do or do not do. So power is worthy of our consideration here. But what's interesting in the phrase of this talk, power of, perspective. You've already got it implicit that perspective has power, right in the talk, right in the talk. Well, what is it that we're talking about with perspective? If you look back at the etymology of perspective, you will find that it comes about even later in the 14th century. And it's very simply it's got over and again, you'll see it's the science of optics. It's the ability to see, the ability to see. And when you get into deeper definitions of that, you will find that it has the nuance of this: to see clearly, to look clearly. And going even further in the use of perspective, you get to clearly perceive. Now that gets juicy, right? To clearly perceive. That gets us then right into, well, what is perception? What are we perceiving? What is this all about? And perceiving predates perspective. And perceiving has the nuances as well in the understanding. It is to become aware. It is to come to know something through personal experience. It is to see, to recognize, to understand. It is to grasp. It is to take. It's to comprehend thoroughly. It is replete with very powerful capacities that are right within us, the capacity to perceive. So what then we find ourselves called to is to understand what our perspectives are, what our perceptions are, so that our power, our agency is fueled towards not limiting us, but liberating us. Yes, I have a sudden cold. I know in one of Don Miguel Ruiz's books, he gives this great story that a woman shared to him later in her life. I think he invited her to sing, or she was somewhere where she got invited to join in the songs. And she said, "Oh no, I can't sing." Period. She believed it 100%. I can't sing. And he got curious with her. He's like, on the side, he's like, "Well, what do you mean you can't sing?" Right? Because everyone can sing. We've got a voice. And to sing is simply to let our voice have a melodic movement to it. It's not to sing a certain way. It's just simply to sing, to do things in a lyrical fashion. But in that, she gets into the story of how when she was little, she used to love to sing. And one day when she was in the home singing, her mom was really upset, not about her, but about something entirely different. And her mom flew off the handle. "Could you just please be quiet?" And said something that was judgmental. I don't remember what it was, but it was something like, "You can't sing." And she internalized that truth so completely that 30 or 40 years later, she could say with full confidence, "I can't sing," and believed it. The power of perception. The power of perception. Many of you know one of the big stories in my life from when I was 5 or 6, when I was loving to walk home from Cincinnati in the autumn leaves, and I was whirling in the leaves and taken up in the dance of nature, and then found myself standing there at the end of the cul-de-sac taking it in. And I will cut to the chase. It's a beautiful long story, but at a certain point, my perception, my perspective, this deep existential sadness rose up. And I wondered in that moment if all life is moving towards death. My perception of what was happening around me, I was in this state of bliss, and this sadness arose from nowhere. And it was like, is that all this is? Is death? We're moving to death? And in the very moment that happened, time stopped, veils pulled open, and I was illumined with a completely life-changing perspective. Oh no, everything is being and becoming in the divine. I had the direct experience, and it has influenced my cosmology 100% since I was 5 or 6. My orientation in this world is completely influenced by that. That is the lens. Those are the glasses that I have on when it comes to living in this world. Our perspectives influence us that much. But let's take a look at this, because when we talk about that, when we talk about clearly perceiving, when we talk about growing in awareness, when we talk about having a grasp of reality or an understanding, who's perceiving? Because it's a position, isn't it? I have a perspective. So in that perspective, I actually have a stance. I am actually in a stance in that very moment with that perspective. And it is a position that influences me in a variety of directions. Now, what we look for, what we want in our lives is that all our perspectives leave us free. As Alan Watts says so well, and I've quoted this a million times, but I love it. The art of living is not wandering aimlessly or fearfully clinging. It is being dynamically present moment by moment. Now, do your perspectives set you up for that? Isn't that fascinating? Do your perspectives set you up that you are dynamically flexible at every single moment, able to shift according to what you're perceiving that's right before you, able to shift, able to move to what's right before you, to what you are grasping in the moment? I would imagine that you would probably say that that happens some of the times, or maybe that happens a lot of the times. But I would imagine you would say that it's not happening all of the time. And maybe it is, so I don't want to assume, but I'm imagining that you are along your path of freedom, but maybe you're not 100% free yet, where you are that dynamic, that innocent at every single moment. So what then? What then is involved here? What are we talking about? What we're called to do is understand that our power, our agency of perspective, our agency is intended to turn towards the very perspective itself to see if it's liberating or not, so that we can open up to the healing or the awakening or the shifting, that our power can, be in the perspective, and that the power yields the fruit that you want. The positioning is very important. So see if outside this talk, you could take the time and you could write down what is or who is the one perceiving when I have a liberating perspective, and what is the one perceiving when I have a limiting perspective. What's happening there? Liberating perspective, limiting perspective. That could be the work of a lifetime right there. Because when we step into that level of inquiry with ourselves, not to analyze with judgment, this is not about blame, shame, guilt. This is open-hearted surrender into what is, so that we discover who we are. When we step there to discover who is the one perceiving, what we do is we allow ourselves the spaciousness to shift from where we may be standing that is holding rigidity to the one that may stand and be fluid. And those can be markers. If your perception leaves you feeling tense, leaves you feeling confused, uncertain, leaves you feeling ill at ease in yourself, leaves you feeling like you're wrestling with the circumstance outside of you, what that's saying is that your perspective isn't liberating for you. And the call would be that to step behind the perspective. Who is the one perceiving? So if we stay in the analyzing of the story, we deprive ourselves of the experience that's undergirding the perception. So when the woman who said, I can't sing, I can't sing, I can't sing, she could have stayed at the story of the trauma from the mom. And that's worthy of respect till the end of her dying days. She could stay there for 90 years. And she would continue to experience the limitation of her perspective. And that is okay. This isn't a better, worse, right, and wrong. It's sad, right? Because to deprive herself of a joy, of an innate joy, is like depriving herself of part of who she is. So there's grief to be had there, and we all do it. It's not just her. But if she were to step back and say, okay, that's my perspective, who's perceiving that? Who's the one perceiving that that's true? Now, in this one, this is an easy story, right? It's very clearly the 5-year-old girl that was singing in the home that got reprimanded. It's very easily that. That's the point of view that formed the perspective there. And in discovering that, she creates a spaciousness to experience that she's more than just that 5-year-old girl, right? She's a 30-year-old woman. She's a woman along her spiritual path. She's a woman with these gifts. She could recognize so many different aspects of herself that she could begin to shift into the one that perceives differently. See, it's not just shifting the perspective, because sometimes that way we can wrangle ourselves. I used to use the word manhandle, but I don't like that. With all the gender things, I don't want to villainize male or female, but wrangle. We can wrangle ourselves into better perspectives. I got to change my perspective. I'm going to say this over and over again until it gets beat into me. But where we shift is where we have the direct experience that's different. So we have the opportunity with the power of our perspective to shift in the knowing of the one perceiving, to shift into another part of ourselves that perceives pretty differently. And then to have the direct experience through those eyes. And then if you are one who believes in a connection with divinity, you can even shift. I'm a believer that source is my very center, that God is my very center. Shifting there. So when I had that leap experience when I was 5, that was God in me. That was my take, my perception, is that I was in the little girl stage of perceiving in that moment, influenced by trauma that had happened that year. And what happened was spontaneously the God source within me pulled me into a different experience that revealed a different perspective, one that is liberating, one that can apply to all things, like a Helen Keller experience. So then where does this bring us with the power of perspective? Well, it brings us to a worthy consideration. What do you hope for in your own freedom? You know, when your perspectives change, your life changes. We've got the whole adage, as within, so without. Whatever my internal way of holding myself is, it's going to be reflected outside of me. So even my perspective in relation to me is necessarily going to influence how I see the rest of the world. What do you hope for with yourself when it comes to perspective? Where are you hitting upon your own limitations? Where are you discovering new liberation? And how then can you offer the kind of support that allows the shift to become wholehearted? How? See the orientation of the questioning, how different it is. It's not, how do I change my mind? Or how do I work out this problem? Or I know I'm not thinking this right, but I need to change what's outside of me first. Or how do I navigate this tension? It's a different series of questions. Now, it doesn't diminish the time space that we're in, where you have to make decisions. You have to decide, am I going to have that meeting or not? Am I going to continue with that commitment or not? But what it does is it introduces deeper layers so that you can come right into touch with yourself. And when you're in touch with yourself, you do something that I want to point out. To come into contact with yourself in these ways harnesses power right into the source. It harnesses the power right where you want it to be. Instead of pulling your power away from you, or giving your power away, or circuitously giving it away because you have a codependent tendency, instead of that, it pulls your power right to where you want it to be. And that is focusing on who is the one perceiving and what is undergirding my perception. So some of the little optional homework, and if you've been a part of things I do, you know, I always give little optional homework pieces. Some of the optional homework piece would be list what some of your driving perspectives are right now. I love this, I hate this. This is working, this is not working. I'm clear about this, I'm not clear about this. I think the world's this way, I think the world's that way. But let it all be harnessed towards your own liberation, not towards what you're going to do to better the world or how you need to engage a certain level of society. Let's let that be secondary or even third out on the ring of consideration. Let's keep it right here. If you will look at any person that you esteem as free, you will discover that they kept it this real and this simple. It's all about me and the divine. It's all about me and self. Everything is about me and self. Everything. And in putting on those lenses, it allowed them to stay close. Well, what's my perception? Who am I? Who am I as the perceiver? Where did that perception come from? Is that truly my perception now? Or is it my old story? Do you see the difference in the orientation? Then what we do, as I mentioned, having a perspective, we have a stance. My perspective, like we could be at a dinner conversation. Well, my perspective on that is we have a stance. What happens is we create a stance that is, like Alan Watts said, open to the moment. We create a stance that's open to the moment. We become a stance that's open and flexible to the moment, because there's a bit of bridge in that experience. As we're reorienting ourselves to a different point of perspective and a different relationship with ourselves, which then leads out to the world. What ends up happening is, in the freedom, we become anchored in the stance that's free. See the way that works? In the freedom that we give ourselves, we slowly or fast become anchored in that stance of freedom. We become it. And then the line between what is perceived and what the perceiver is even begins to dissolve as well. But that's the topic for another talk. This seems as though this would lead you into greater uncertainty. And I can assure you it leads you into greater stability, greater anchoredness into the moment, greater revelation. It leads you into the place where all healing can take place with bam immediacy. Because it doesn't diminish the story that created the trauma, but it catches it up with such a power of presence, that your perspective is presence. It catches it up with such a power that the juice of the power can go right to the wound, right to the trauma. Just like that did in my 5-year-old story. You know, what's interesting about that story, that I don't always tell, and I will tell here, I tell versions of it, is that for years and years, I only had the story of whirling home in bliss, standing there, having this moment with a tree and a leaf on the tree. And then when the leaf broke away, having this existential sadness rise up because the leaf felt like it was dying, and that for years and years, that leaf dying, I felt the leaf was me. I didn't need to think it. It was just what happened. And then I had the inner experience of, I am only being and becoming in consciousness. My words then would have been God. So that was my story for ages. And then I was, 14 years. And that's still my story because that's what matters most. But 14 years later, I went to a charismatic mass. I was still Catholic. I was 19 at the time. And I went to this charismatic mass, and it was a powerful charismatic mass. I mean, everybody left and right were getting slain in the spirit. And we were going into the liturgy parts, and I was standing up and everything was woozing, but this was happening to me daily. So it wasn't anything new. And I was just there, and I was having these moments with the beloved, and everything disappeared from me. I couldn't hear what people were saying. I vaguely saw shapes and forms around me. It was that taken into ecstasy. And I was like, wow. And I surrendered. I gave myself into that moment. And what happened then was at a certain point, we all went up single file to get laying on of hands. Healing happened. And I was cognizant enough to be able to walk up the aisle, but not enough to really engage who was before me or who was going to lay hands or whatever. And I mumbled something because I think that the priest said, "Did you say you're dying of cancer?" Like, I didn't say that, but whatever I mumbled sounded really serious. And I was too lost in spirit to say anything. So he went ahead and he just, bam, the moment his hands touched my forehead, from crown down, whoosh, and I was out on the floor. And people were around me praying. And I left that place right there. I was actively back at that cul-de-sac moment where I was standing before that tree, lost in bliss, and the existential sadness rose up. Well, what came forward when I was 19 was just amazing. What happened was I had gone through a lot of trauma in early childhood, and lost my grandma, almost lost my mom, had a lot of instability, didn't know where the next shoe was going to fall up until about 5 years old. And I was there brimming with joy to be alive, and yet having all this disappearance happen all around me. And I didn't know it at 5 years old, but that was in me. That existential sadness, like, what am I really here for, was in me, but it was pre-verbal. Well, when I was there, slain in the spirit, all of that trauma came forward. And what happened is I experienced a spiritual friend. I experienced there in white, blue light at that moment at 5 years old. And the hands were huge. They represented like the hands of God, but the hands were huge. And I began weeping. I mean, I was weeping. I was probably down on that floor for a good 2 to 3 hours. And I was weeping and weeping. And all the tears were being held and caught by this spiritual friend. And as I was weeping and releasing, unknown to me, I was being washed in new ways of things I didn't know needed to be washed, but they were there influencing my perspective. Well, when it ended, the sadness was so gone of this life series of events that I was drunk in the spirit. I reverted into laughing. I mean, and as I opened my eyes, I am like laughing hysterically. And I was in that intoxicated state, I kid you not, for 2 solid weeks. I had a friend visiting me, and it was really funny. He had a dramatic experience too. It was a little different. So we were kind of companions, but he was visiting me from the East when we were in Santa Cruz, California. But in the perspective that had influenced me when I was 5 and I was living my life by, there was the opportunity for that perspective to to exist so that new aspects of myself could come forward at the right time in the right place. We are an unfolding mystery. The adventure, truly, the adventure is the discovery of who we are again and again and again. At every single moment, the discovery. And as we allow the power of our perspective to provide the spaciousness for that, we can be in the immediacy of it. See, when we stay on the level of story, again, it doesn't diminish the need to work with our stories. There's a need to work stuff out. If we've got a conflict with somebody, we want to use our skills and work towards that and work that out. If we've got something that's flying us high, we want to say yes to that and fly with that. It's not diminishing our human story in its trajectory or its presence, but it is saying that as we enter into life significantly and not put it to the side, not discount it, take it so serious to recognize that there's so much power in our perspectives, conscious and unconscious, that if we tend them every day, if we cared for them every day, what if we woke up in the morning and we said a little prayer for ourselves? Let me learn today a limiting perspective I have that I didn't even know. Or what if we woke up another morning? Let me experience today the celebration of a perspective that I didn't even know that I had, that gives me so much joy. And provide some fluidity for ourselves in considering it important enough to be part of our daily presence process. What we'll discover is more and more as we enter into the stance, this fluid stance, we will discover ourselves more and more free, more and more free. Because we have certain perspectives that clamp into our lives like this. They're holding on for dear life. They've made the best choice possible for you, and you're holding on. And they don't serve us, but it's natural to have them. Because most of the times those perspectives, yes, they happen because of coping mechanisms or reactionary responses to trauma, but they also happen because of good things. Like maybe you made a commitment in your 20s that was so life-giving to you that you're still faithful to it at 60, even though it no longer serves you. But you remember the brilliance of when your perspective shifted and you gave that yes, and something of you gave the yes to death till we part, even in tendril ways. See, we form these perspectives even for these really great reasons. So powerful. Isn't it time to allow your own process to care enough to look at your power and how you use it and your perspectives, and to enter into the process of repositioning yourself through these very gentle questions? Who is it that's perceiving in this moment? Let's say you're in a tricky situation. Let's say you made a commitment and you made it for all the best reasons, and you're caught by it. You don't know how to move forward. You don't know what it means to move forward. You can't move in, you can't move out. You're persevering. What if you sat with that and you said, well, what is my perspective about this? Not my story about it, but the perspective of it. For instance, let's say I was in a marriage and it was really over. My story around that would be, wow, I'm getting all the signs this is really over. We're afraid to talk about it. Things haven't been going so well. How can I be a better lover? What can I do here? I made this commitment. Like, those are all the story questions that we don't negate. But what if I took the moment and said, my perspective is this? Wow, I think that it's over. And be with that, be with that. And then step back one more. Who is the one perceiving this? I remember this was like 15 years ago now, and I was in a beautiful relationship. We dated for close to 3 years. We loved each other. We were like best friends. We were compatible on a lot of levels, but we were not compatible for long-term partnership. Fundamental things that were really important to us weren't lined up. But we loved each other. We loved spending time together, and there was a lot of passion. But we kind of knew, and it wasn't working because the things that weren't working in the partnership kept showing themselves as really important to address. And I can't speak for him, but it seems to me we both were staying in the story of it and not stepping back and saying, what's my real perspective here? I did once, but then nothing happened, nothing changed between us. And then I was put in the position of having acknowledged something and having to go, oh, wow, now what do I do? And I remember my pivotal moment in my perspective changing. And it was this, I acknowledged honestly my perspective. It was Valentine's Day, and we were going to do something fun, do like the dinner and fun performance thing or something. And I was living in Florida, and I saw that Gladys Knight and the Pips were playing at a big place called the Van Wezel. It's a big performing arts place. And I love her, and I'd never seen her live. Here she was, so old and, traveling and I said, well, look, I won't say my partner's name. And I said, so, because he was asking, because he wanted to make the arrangements so it would be a surprise. He said, what would you really like? And I said, look, we were going through some financial difficulties. And I said, Gladys Knight is playing at the Van Wezel. And the whole back section, the tickets are only $25 a piece. I said, so I would love that. I would love that. I don't need anything fancier. I don't need to sit right up front. I don't need anything else, just to go with you. And remember, we are in the stage of, it's not working. It's not working. But we both loved each other and just didn't know what to do, really. We really didn't. So we get to this Gladys Knight and the Pips concert. And we're walking in, and he gives the tickets. And so the guy motions us down, and it's kind of a big thing. There's no center aisle. So sometimes you have to go down and over and up, and that's what we did. He directed us down. So we went down and we went over, and we were going up, and I'm assuming we're going towards the back, and somebody stops us and ushers us to go in the 4th row. My partner had surprised me and paid $250 a ticket to have us right up front. So I was really moved. But he was very romantic and didn't surprise me, but I didn't expect it given where we were at the time. So here we are in this front row. Oh my gosh, she was so good. And we're like on the front, it's like this massive, the few of us, or the ones in the front, not the few of us, but we were like diehard lovers of Gladys Knight. And we were singing every song, and at times standing up and dancing and all the rest. And I'm standing up as the next song comes on. And you may be guessing the song intuitively. Neither one of us wants to say goodbye. And she is singing that song. And if you listen to the words of that song, it gives you goosebumps. And she ends she's in the refrain. Neither one of us wants to be the first to say goodbye. And you can imagine in that moment, I was weeping. I mean, I was the only one standing up in my whole area because it was a slow song. So nobody was dancing. And I could care less. And I'm just snot running down my face. I'm weeping. And I shifted my perspective because I admitted what my real perspective was. I was dancing around it in my story. And then when she was singing those words, I said, that's where I'm at. That's my perspective. I know it's over, but I just don't want to be the first one to say goodbye. Bam, bam. That's what we're talking about. Being willing to step back, say, what is my perspective here? Give yourself the honor and the worthiness. What is my perspective? Value yourself enough to give yourself sacred counsel. And then from there, who is the one perceiving? And for me, the one perceiving was the one that loved this man with all my heart. And yet was clear it wasn't going to change. And it wasn't sustainable as a real partnership. As best friends who were lovers, great, that would have worked, but not that part. Everything in me changed in that moment. And it wasn't a matter of the dance of it all anymore. It was, how do I go about initiating the conversation? What do I really want to say? How can I make sure that I do it in a way that's loving? And when does it happen? It took me a little bit of time after that, not a long time, but a little bit of time after that to find the right moment. But I remember the moment we were sitting on, he had just moved into a rental. We were not, we went from living together to not living together. And he had just moved into a separate place, and we were sitting on his bed, and I knew it was time. And I remember I took his hands in my hands, and I just started crying, and I spent 45 minutes recounting everything I loved about him and our relationship. Everything. And then I said, and it's not working. And I need to say goodbye. It's the power that we have. It's the power that we have. We have within us. We talk about being resourced, about having everything we need within us. Letting the questions bring us back can make the fertile environment for our shifting. We don't have to do it all alone. We can have the friendship of our highest self to do it with us. See, that was a remarkable moment for me because I was in complete alignment with my highest self. So I had the companionship and the friendship, which was in the place that was free of the blame, shame, guilt, should, shouldn't, blah, blah, blah stuff. I was free. Doesn't mean it wasn't painful. Doesn't mean there wasn't healing time afterwards. But it did harness me with the power to say all that was worthy to say. All that is worthy to say. And when that happened, I walked away needing healing because we'd been together for so long, but clean, totally clean. No residues, no hooks, no threads, clean. I know in a recent retreat in March that I had, we were exploring perspective in one of the sessions. And this phrase came up as a really powerful one, as a way to help position in this process too. It's the phrase, what if? So we can look at the past and go, what if? What if this? What if that? What if this? We can look at the messiness of our situations that can cause us confusion. I'm assuming challenge here. And we can go, what if this changed? What if that changed? What if I changed? What if this did? What if, we can go on forever and ever and ever. Or we could look to the bright future of our being. And we could say, what if this moment I were to step in to a new level of freedom, within myself. Shift in perspective, right? Takes all the charge off all the other pieces. Nothing to work out, nothing to regret. Action steps to take from a place of love, but nothing to have resolved before the shift of perspective. It's a fallacy to think that in shifting our perspectives, we have to work something out first. When we are shifted in our perspectives, it is worked out by the shifting itself, because we're brought closer into the capacity to see things as they truly are. Wow, right? What if? What if? There are many operative questions like that. See if you could make a list for yourself when it comes to getting in touch with your perspectives and noticing the limiting ones and the liberating ones. And you want to even use the liberating ones in this, because remember, we're always going to be changing. We're always going to be dynamic. We're going to have the human tendency. I say we, I'm assuming most of you are in the category as me. Maybe I should just say me. I am oftentimes in the desire that as I've shifted in my perspective, that I won't need to shift again. If it's really liberating, that this is like the arrival, only to find over and over again, the arrival happens again and again and again, because that's the adventure of the mystery of who and what we are. So tonight then I leave you. Oh my word, it's 8 o'clock. I'm leaving you very fast now. Tonight, I leave you with these considerations and these questions. You'll get the recording in the email. Write down the questions. Write down what really struck you. Make a commitment to yourself to actively step in the engagement of your perspectives and the power that you have to work with just them. Even if you don't change anything beyond that, just them, because their change will change you. And then you will continue to change in your life with grace. Blessings, my friends. So if you want, I am going to stop the recording, but if you want to put anything in the chat box, please do. And I'll be happy to say a word to it or read it out to everybody.